Whoa, wait, that's it? You're done? Just like that? Hi, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and I bring you a fresh perspective on the law without offering any legal advice. So pull up a chair. This is what we're discussing today. Yesterday, the state rested in the case of the zombie Terminator, formerly known as Lorie Vallow, and more recently as Lorie Daybell. And then, shortly thereafter, Lorie Daybell said that she would rest, although she reserved the right to potentially testify in her own defense. That has not yet been decided. Charles Vallow, the decedent, was her fourth husband, which I guess makes Chad Daybell the fifth husband. How screwed up do you have to be to get married and divorced four times and try it again on husband 5.0? Well, to this point, the evidence in the case logically established that the pair were married, that they were on the outs, that Lori was stalking Chad, and that Charles was the odd man out and he was dating another woman. The scenario describes a lot of couples in the United States. However, most of them don't go on to commit murder. If Lori mentioned it once, she mentioned it a dozen times that Charles had a $2 million policy on her life and only a $1 million policy on his, as if, in some form of twisted logic, her life was somehow more valuable than his. Maybe her intent was to show how much Charles loved her. Somehow I think that maybe the bloom was off the rose when Alex got around to pulling the trigger. Let's talk for a moment about the elements of criminal conspiracy, which is what the state has to prove. First, they have to prove an agreement. There must be an agreement between two or more parties. The agreement can be explicit, meaning that everybody sits down at the table and agrees to it, or it can be implicit, meaning that people see what's happening and they take action and they come to support the conspiracy. And there may be some degree of implicit and explicit in this particular case. The next thing there has to be is intent. The parties have to intend to agree and intend to participate in the conspiracy and intend the result of the conspiracy. It's not enough for individuals to act in parallel or coincidentally. There must be a conscious decision to join the conspiracy and to the intent to achieve the objective of the conspiracy. Next, there must be at least one overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Most jurisdictions require that at least one of the conspirators commit an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. The act does not need to be illegal in itself. In fact, it can be something like purchasing a firearm or purchasing weapons, purchasing a knife, purchasing ammunition. But it must demonstrate that the conspiracy is active and moving forward toward a goal. Here, the idea is that Alex brought the gun to the house in the orange duffel bag and that that's evidence of at least one overt act that was committed. The procurement of a weapon to unalive Charles was that overt act. The overt act also needs to corroborate the existence of the conspiracy, and it shows that the parties are taking steps to accomplish their goal so that we have agreement, intent, and an overt act, and that completes the elements of a conspiracy. And of course, the conspiracy obviously requires at least two people. In this case, if you include the children, there were more than two people. And the children were important because everyone had to agree to tell the same story. The agreement to falsify what happened in that room is, of itself, a form of conspiracy. Those are the things the state had to prove. Did they prove them? Let me know what you think in the comments. The state's position is that the agreement can be inferred because Alex Cox and Lori worked together to unalive Charles. We know this because Alex made a self defense claim, and Lori and Tylee provided evidence supporting that claim in the form of their statements to the police. But remember, physical evidence doesn't lie. and there was no blood evidence to support the claim of self-defense. If Alex had been hit in the head with that bat, if that had been an instrument that Charles was using to bludgeon him, there would be blood on the bat. There was none. And there would be blood all over the place and probably some evidence of people trying to stop it or clean it up. And of course, that wasn't there either. The evidence of intent is a little more circumspect. The evidence that they intended the actions in furtherance of the conspiracy are buttressed by the fact that they acted together and that everyone in the conspiracy shared the same religious delusion and cooperated in the same poorly constructed cover up. The religious delusion was that Charles was possessed by some kind of an evil spirit, and the only way to fix that was to permanently turn off his lights. The overt act, again, those are not hard to figure out. There are multiple overt acts here. One overt act was gathering at the house. Another overt act was bringing the firearm to the house. There was an overt act in engaging in self injury to make it look like self defense. Pulling the trigger twice on the firearm, each one was an overt act. And the further overt act was everybody getting together and lying to the police about everything. I would point out that firing at Charles as after he was already down, as I said yesterday, goes against the whole idea of self-defense. It's worth noting that Lorie, if she had not married Chad a mere 5 weeks after Charles assumed room temperature, and if thereafter the children had not been sent off into the great beyond, it's likely that the Arizona authorities would never have had enough evidence to convict Lorie for the conspiracy in this case. And they still may not have enough evidence if the jury does its job. If I were the prosecutor, though, I would be hammering home the idea that the people who were in that house that day, there's only one who remains to tell the story. Everyone else is gone. As every master criminal knows, you don't leave witnesses behind. That seems to have been Lorie's approach in this particular case. Charles is gone, and Chad is in prison. He can't testify. Tylee's gone. JJ's gone. She's the only one left standing. I had logically expected that the state would put on additional evidence, particularly evidence of agreement, but they never did. There was no direct evidence of that. There was, however, quite a bit of circumstantial evidence. Although she didn't benefit from it, she believed she would benefit from Charles' insurance policy. Her text message to Chad about that and the fact that it had been changed so she was no longer the beneficiary was pretty competent evidence that there was at least some financial motive in the murder. Then there was Lorie's timeline. The timeline that Lorie gave to the police was different than the timeline that came in through the cell phone pings. That evidence established Lorie as a liar, and, as the Latin phrase goes, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. If you're false about one thing, you're false about everything. If you believe the witness lied about one thing, a jury can disregard everything that they said. Then we have the weird cult-like behavior of Lorie, Chad, and Alex. Lorie thinks she's some kind of celestial being, a god of sorts, if you will, and has put herself on some higher moral plane. Everyone she doesn't like has an evil spirit. Maybe she's just seeing a reflection. Apparently, if you didn't like Lorie, you must be possessed by an evil spirit, and that was the line that she sold to both Alex and to Chad. She was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Her solution to people being possessed by evil spirits, the name she gave them was zombies, was to terminate them. I wonder if she'd ever read the Bible. Supposedly, the Book of Mormon is built off the Bible. I don't know. I've never read it. But I do have some doubts about that whole cult. It's worth noting that during Jesus' lifetime, he cast out evil spirits from people that he had encountered. Meaning, of course, that he did not cause the death of the individuals who had been possessed. He freed them from the slavery of the evil spirits, and his apostles, Peter, John, and Paul, all did the same thing. They caused the evil spirits to leave the body of the possessed person. They didn't terminate the possessed person with extreme prejudice. When I look at Chad Daybell and Lorie Daybell, I see today's version of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. For those of you who were not around in the 1970s for the PTL Club, which ostensibly stood for Praise the Lord, but which was mocked by comedians as the Pass the Loot Club, there was a big financial scandal involved with it. It was a televangelism program that was on cable in the 1970s. Jim Baker was the principal evangelist. He later was disgraced over the financial issues and some certain sexual misconduct. He was sent to prison, and he's now back doing televangelism. Like the early version of Jim Baker, Lorie was all about the Benjamins. Unlike him, anyone that disagreed with her theology was a zombie or an evil spirit. That is such a clean and binary way to look at the world that it must be the product of some deranged thinking. One of the things I found interesting was in the comments, the last video, where somebody said that Lori'd be in better shape if she hadn't punched the tickets of Ty Lee and JJ and if Alex had not died. But I'm not sure that's true. Maybe Ty Lee and JJ were dealt with because they finally saw through their mom and recognized what happened to Charles. Or maybe they were just inconvenient and she wanted to go live a fantasy as a newlywed wife. I don't know. Only Lorie really knows for sure what happened there. But to get to the issue of conspiracy, the jury is going to have to stack some inferences. I don't know what the jury is necessarily going to do there. For example, you have to assume that because she was hungry for money, she decided to have Alex permanently remove her husband from the land of the living for the insurance proceeds. Or in the alternative, you had to believe she had Alex pull the trigger because he was a zombie. Either way, the central figure in the death, she was the hub, and these characters are the spokes. At the hub was Lorie. Jurors do not always understand the evidence, and most take their job seriously, so those inferences are going to need to be patiently explained in closing argument. The fact that she's now no longer a beneficiary of the policy actually works in her favor. She didn't get any payout, and she can say at this point that she wasn't really looking for one. As she told the woman on the phone call with the insurance company, she was just making sure that she'd be able to pay off Charles's debts. Well, maybe that's what she was doing, and maybe she was just really disappointed that there was going to be no cash coming her way. The jury would have to believe that she manipulated Alex to pull the trigger, and she manipulated Ty Lee to go along with it, and she set this whole thing up. That's going to take a lot of explanation and a lot of argument in closing to get that over the hump. That's because the jury would need to believe that the absence of fingerprints, or at least identifiable fingerprints, was due to the bat being wiped down after it was used to injure Alex. And because criminals rarely think through their actions, they likely wiped the blood off the bat when they were wiping down the bat. Oopsie. When the state argues to the jury, they need to tie the individual pieces of evidence to the elements of the conspiracy. They need to provide the most reasonable inferences for the jury to follow, and they need to be persuasive. The state has indicated they want 1 hour for argument. I don't think that's enough time, but they have to do them. Lorie, however, has an easier job. She just has to poke holes in one element of the conspiracy claim and she's home free. She can credibly claim that it was self defense because the police did not charge Alex in the death, believing the self defense claim. She can argue if the cops thought it was really self defense, then, jury, who are you to disagree with them? Now, will she do that? I doubt it. I strongly suspect she'll get up there and blunder around like she has done in cross examination. I would venture to guess that she'll probably get slapped down 5 or 6 times for improper argument during her closing, and she'll be rebuked by the judge for it. But should she testify? Not on your life. If she testifies, she opens the door to her Idaho convictions coming into evidence. Under Arizona law, felony convictions come in under the Arizona Rule of Evidence 609. If the prior conviction was for felony, a crime punishable by death or imprisonment for more than 1 year, it may be admitted for impeachment purposes only if the court determines that its probative value outweighs its prejudicial effect to the defendant. Now, that's a pretty lenient test as far as the defendant goes. This balancing test is particularly stringent when the prior conviction is similar to the charged offense, as it could unduly influence the jury. In that instance, sometimes the courts will sanitize the conviction by saying she has a conviction for a felony, but not saying what the felony is. I don't know that I see the court doing that here. First of all, the probative value of her unaliving two people who were likely a part of the planning and execution of the scheme is very strong evidence. It's probative of her participation in the conspiracy, and more importantly, potentially an overt act in furtherance of it. Having listened to the judge, I think he'd be inclined to let the Idaho crimes in on cross examination. So today they're working through the jury instructions, and even though they could finish up on Friday, they instead opted to finish up on Monday, which gives the jury a full week to decide the case and which gives Lorie Daybell a little extra time to make the determination as to whether or not she's going to testify. I almost hope she does. That's what I have for you. That's what I have for you today. I hope you found it helpful, interesting, or maybe both. If there's a subject you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to send me an email at the address above. If you like what we do, please feel free to subscribe and come on back to the beach tomorrow. I release videos every weekday, weather and work permitting. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for your fellow man. It makes the world a better place, one kind act at a time. And now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine that you might like.